We have a departmental safety day. And so as the chair of the safety committee, I've been sort of working with others in the committee about trying to implement sort of safety policies in the department, trying to address sort of topics. And so we've been having, I think, sort of a meeting every 2 or 3 weeks or so, the last few months. And one of the things we wanted to do was to have a departmental sort of safety day. Because I remember when I started in the department, Professor Shalani, she had a departmental safety day. And I thought it was a good opportunity to raise sort of any topics that are of interest in relation to safety that may be on people's agendas that hasn't been raised in a sort of forum before. And one of the things when I started in this position was Yo communicated to me some issues that had arisen from chemical safety. And so we actually had an issue of ether producing chemicals that we had to call out the bomb squad actually to dispose of those chemicals. And so these are chemicals that had been left in storage in the department and I think largely forgotten about. And one of the issues about these things apparently is when you open it and you expose it to oxygen, it can over time become explosive. And so chemical safety was one of the things that was addressed as an issue to talk about. And one of the things that is hopefully a tool to help with that is the Chematix system, which Evan Engman has gladly come and sort of talk to us about that system, which is a way of sort of documenting about the chemicals in the department. It's a voluntary system, but it's encouraged that people use it. And then after Evan's had a chance to sort of talk about the system and demonstrate it, the hope is that we can have a sort of question and answers sort of thing where we can ask about that topic, and also more general sort of safety issues that might arise. Like, so I remember last time we had these sort of meetings, there was a sort of discussion about what issues individual labs agendas. So is there an issue in one lab about, say, gas valves, for example? And one of the things that we're going to have to do as labs is do the annual sort of safety sort of training. That's something that will be coming up quite soon. And as part of that, there will be inspections of the labs next year. So we actually skipped that last year because we had COVID sort of interfered with everything. But the plan is that there will start to be some inspections of labs. And so as part of that, we'll have to make sure that we do our annual safety assessments and that there's a form to do for that. So if there's any questions that relate to that process, this is a good forum to discuss some of those issues. And we have health and safety expert with us today who can help to field some of that questions on these topics. But I think we're probably good to get started. One thing I would say is that if people could sign on the sign-up sheets, we have an idea of who's attending and mention what lab you're from. And also, we have a survey with a few questions on it. So what was the presentation today helpful? What was most beneficial thing from the safety meeting? And what topics would you like to be covered in the future? If you could sort of fill that in at the end and give some sort of feedback, that would be helpful for us in the future, because we plan to be having some more meetings in the future, and it'll help us to guide what issues are of concern to you guys. Okay, Evan Engman is from the DHS, and if you're going to take it away, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Evan Engman. I'm with University Health and Safety. I cover the area of CFANS, CBS, College of Design, a few other places throughout the university. And so I just serve as kind of a safety representative for, everybody that falls into those areas and those departments. And then we have DSOs like Steve that'll take all your guys' questions, compile them, present them to me, and we review everything and figure out what the answer is and disseminate that information back to you guys. So that's kind of who I am. To talk about Chematix specifically, so I don't even remember what year it was, 2019, we were planning on rolling out Chematix to all of CFANS. And so we're getting everybody rolled into that. And the deadline was by 2020, December 2020. Well, COVID happened and kind of threw everything away. So now we're trying to get everybody into this by 2021, or not 2021, 2022, December 2022, I believe is the deadline. So basically what this is an inventory management system. So if you look at OSHA regulations when it comes to workplace health and safety, there is one specific requirement that applies to labs. A lot of the other stuff is kind of like nice to have, not really enforced. But one thing that is actually enforced is an inventory. You have to have a chemical inventory for your lab. It's just one part of that they're pretty solid on. So it's good information to have. Like Steve said, if you have any chemicals that are lingering around, some of them are in fact explosives. I forget the name of, there's a specific class of chemicals for that, but some of them can be hazardous if they're left around for a period of time. And we have discovered those in other places as well. So the way Chematix kind of helps with that, you guys are reviewing your inventories by the OSHA standard. It should be done annually. You look at everything that you have, make sure the list is updated, and you have that to hold on to and say, this is what we have. So what Chematix is basically an online format for that, where you can store all this information. And then we as UHS can also look in there and see what you guys have. So let's say you guys have an emergency, some chemical or whatever you're doing, some experiment goes haywire, somebody gets injured. Now emergency services has to show up and figure out what's going on. Well, we don't know what's in your lab. We don't know what's spilled or what chemicals they were using. So we have a chemical inventory that we're able to access through this database, give that to EMS personnel or fire department really is the ones who are going to be going in there, and they can figure out what's kind of going on from that, and it's helpful to them. So the way that we kind of rolled this out initially, I don't know, does that show up on your screen? This?
Yes.
Okay, so the way we rolled this out is I'll send links to you guys again for this, but what I had labs do was fill out this chemical registry form, and it basically just says what department you're in, who's the PI, who's your lab manager if you have one, what building are you in, and what lab rooms are you in. And if you actually have a chemical inventory, you can upload it into that, and I can take a look at that and see if it's in the correct format, where I could just, instead of going through and doing what I'm about to show you guys, you could just throw it into that system. I'll pull it out. I'll reorganize it just a little bit, and then I'll upload it into the system. And then you don't have to go through all this typing in chemicals and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a nice to have. It's super clunky. I have to do a lot of work on my end to do that. So I'll show you the kind of the format. When I do send the links out, I'll just copy the Excel document in what form it has to be in. It just basically has to have cast numbers, chemical name, the quantity, whether it's in, if you have 5 grams of something, it just has 5 in one category, and then the quantity in the next category, in the next line over. But I'll send a spreadsheet that shows everything like that. And so it's super simple, but in order for me to get it into the system, it has to be perfect, and it's not a smart way of doing it. So I can do it. If you want to go that route, I'm happy to do that and put it in the system. So how do you get to the Chematix login? We have a lab and research safety page that has a lot of useful information in it. I like to highlight the document library. Just in general, if you have any questions about like what kind of signage do I need on my lab, all that stuff. Specific hazards, we had like a battery explode in one of our work areas the other day, and we have safety alerts and stuff like that on there. So it's a good resource to look on the document library for stuff. So for Chematix, there's this link right here that says chemical inventory inspections and waste login. So you click on that, you end up at the Chematix splash page. Actually, it'll make you log in, but once you get beyond that, since I'm already logged in, it'll just go to the page. And so it brings up my name, who my home department is. And then you click on, since you're already in the Chematix system, there's these 3 tabs at the top. There's Chematix, there's radial logistics, and then there's inspection. Inspection applies to me as UHS. Radial logistics is basically if you had any radiation sources in your lab, you'd be going through that tab with radiation department. And then Chematix is the one we're talking about today. So this encompasses mostly regulated waste and us to look at your inventory system. So if I was to start going into this system, basically the point of Yeah. When you go through the chemical registry, I'll send you an email that says, here's what your lab looks like in Chematix. It'll just basically be a room number, the name of the PI with their first initial, and that'll be how your lab will show up in the inventory. So if you were to look at mine as if I'm the PI over at the Thompson Center, it'll be 100 Engman E, and that's how it'll show up. So that right there is viewing my inventory in my lab, is how it'll show up. So kind of just the basic way of using this. Going back to view and print my inventory, you can see that I have one over in Thompson Center. If I look at the inventory, I put 100 milliliters of acetone in there this morning. It's not really super complex. I probably should have added more in there, but that's what I got or had entered in. So if I wanted to enter a chemical into this, so let's say you don't go the route of, oh, we already have the Excel document and stuff like that. You have to enter stuff into the system. There's training documentation that's basically talking about what I'm talking about today. But if that's not helpful, obviously we have me talking about it. So if I want to add a chemical into the inventory, this is pretty easy. I'll just pick, I don't even know here. We got bleach, let's go to ethanol. You type in ethanol to look for a chemical, you search the CAD, which will bring up, hundreds of types of ethanol, right? So how these all show up basically is every time somebody submits hazardous waste to our regulated waste group, they'll type it into the system. So it's already cataloged in there just in case somebody brings it up again. So if you were to pick something really specific, pesticides comes to mind. If you submit a pesticide for haz waste, they'll type it into the system. So the next time you do it, it'll actually show up. So that's why you have all these hundreds of versions of ethanol in here. So let's just say I have just regular ethanol.pg10, whatever it is. So I have the container size. I'm just going to type in 10 liters of this. Actually, be realistic. If I had 4-liter bottle of that and I had 5 of them. So you see on the sidebar, there's all these red lines. That's basically telling you that those are the required areas. And then I can submit that into the system. It's pretty easy. The auto-generate barcodes is something, if we had a little bit more advanced system, you could have barcoding system where the haz waste guys could come by, scan everything, package it up and leave. So this auto-generate barcodes is just kind of a general formality right now. This barcode doesn't really mean anything. All you do is click auto-generate barcode, submit it, click OK. For some reason that shows up. And then I'll look in my inventory and I'll see that all those things have shown up into that system. So that's basically how you enter a chemical in it. The reason I bring up the spreadsheet part of it is if you have 200 chemicals, 400 chemicals, huge lists that we've gotten from organic chemistry and stuff like that. Sometimes it's easier if you're just the one PI, it's easier to send the spreadsheet. We enter it all in. It can be pretty time consuming for us, but sometimes it just makes it easier. So that's the general way of doing that. Adding gas cylinders is basically the same page of how you enter the gas cylinder in there. Another part is to edit the lab users. So if you wanted to have somebody else on your lab besides yourself, I'm going to send an email that says, this is who you wanted on there, who's your lab manager and who's your PI will be added into there. So for my lab, I'm the PI, and then my supervisor on this list is basically the lab supervisor, and we're both lab users. So what this means in our system is I can do everything. I can change my personnel around, and my lab manager can also change personnel around and can add and delete people. If you had somebody that's just like, it's defined as EHS helper in this, but it's really just if you had a student in your lab or somebody else, that would be that person, unless you want them to, move people around. They would just be a user, which means they can basically just enter chemicals into it and that's it. So if you want somebody, if you wanted a student to enter all your stuff into Chematix, usually that's how that goes. So to manage personnel, if I wanted to add or subtract somebody, If I wanted to change these around, I don't know if I can do it really easily here. I could call myself the lab supervisor or something like that and change that around. Let me add one of my coworkers. So if I wanted to add somebody in, just go down here like that, select this user. And then I have my coworker, Brian Anderson, assigned to my lab, and he is just a lab user. So if I wanted him to enter all my stuff in, he has the ability to do that. Now, if I wanted to make him a lab super user, I could do that as well, which means he has the ability to change me out of there or Jody out of there if we were to quit or something like that. So that's kind of how that goes. Not forgetting anything. Okay. Another thing that also comes up a lot is, and I don't know if I'll be able to show it now. Okay, so if you were to consume 4 liters of ethanol for an experiment, or you actually goofed something up, let's say you entered something in and it's not actually what it is, you can change container status, which basically means, if you used it in an experiment and you want it to go away, you no longer have it, you just say consumed by experiment. Or if you goofed it up, you can just say, yeah, it's done, it's gone. And then change container status. It subtracts it from your list, and then you don't have to worry about that anymore. There's a few other options. If you were to send something off to waste and the waste guys came and pick it up, you could also do that. You could change container status. And then you'd be able to click waste card pickup requested, which means they came and took it away. I should say too, your guys' screen won't actually look like this. So you'll have add items to inventory, the manage lab inventory box, and then the rest of this is me because I have weird privileges inside this system to look at the university as a whole. There's another thing too, as well, as if you want to add storage units. Let's say you have a pretty large lab room and you have like 5 different storage areas that are all labeled out. It's like Flam cabinet 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can also change your storage units around. So I have on here a fridge. I have hood 11A, flammables cabinet in an area that's undefined. So if you wanted to manage your storage units, add these locations, I could just put flammable cabinet, flammable cabinet 1, commit new record, and then I have that storage location in there. So where that actually comes up, if I was to go into add chemicals into my inventory, I'm going to pick acetone or common chemical. Jeez. I already used to show it. Maybe they don't let you do that anymore. Hold on. Okay, so it'll come up when you entered in. You can have your storage unit. If I want to say flammables cabinet 1, auto generate barcode, and then I submit. That container is going to be labeled inside my inventory as under that location. So as you see, the acetone flammable cabinet 1. So if you want to be more defined like that, and if you want to have them when the actual locations is, if you have a lot of stuff, that can be pretty helpful as well. And I had one more thing and I totally forgot what it was. So another thing that I get a question about quite a bit is if you have a specific chemical that's like known as a peroxide former, which is what Stephen was talking about. Is what Stephen was talking about with when we had the bomb squad come and pick the chemical up. It was a isopropyl ether that had been sitting since the 80s. And so now inside our system, we classify these chemicals. We have PFC class B, there's a class A, B, C, I forget what it goes down to, but The isopropyl ether was a class A, so it's more shock sensitive, that type of thing. You could just be sitting there and explode. We have a whole thing inside our document library that goes pretty extensively over what a peroxide forming class chemical would be. So if I was to put this into my chemical inventory, what's going to happen now is if I have 1 liter of this, I have my lab selected, and I go to submit it, it's going to tell me I can't do that because I have to enter a date for that. So on these peroxide forming chemicals, if it's old and might not have put the expiration date on it, something like a class B can usually be shelved for about 6 months, I want to say 6 months to a year. If it doesn't have an expiration date on it, I would recommend getting rid of it unless it has an inhibitor in it. But if you don't know what that date is, I just recommend putting it to the end of the year. And if you don't need it, submit it for waste. So it's just out of your lab in general. You can just pick a date that when it expires, if it does have that date on there, mine, I'll just say it's December 30th. I should get rid of it by then. And then now I can actually submit that chemical and it can go into my system. So a lot of people, I've gotten quite a few emails about like, I have, this chemical and it gets hung up on that expiration date. If it doesn't have one and you don't need that chemical, just get rid of it. But if it has the date on it from the time that it was open and when it expires, put that into the system and then it'll allow you to submit that into the thing. So that's pretty much it. You can also, I imagine a lot of you guys do a lot of waste through this module. I'm not so familiar with that side of it, but I do know our regulated waste team is very, very good at helping everybody through this. And they also have quite a few video tutorials on there that'll kind of help break it down how to submit stuff from that system. That is pretty helpful. So that's, I think, all I have to talk about with the Chematix system. It can get a little bit more nuanced than that when it comes to like mixtures and stuff like that. But fundamentally, that's how you use it. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So the format of the Excel spreadsheet that you're talking about, is there any format that we have to have a spreadsheet in to send to you, or we should just send whatever we have?
If you have a inventory of your chemicals and you want me to just upload it into the system for you instead of going through and entering all that stuff, let me see. I can show you what that'll look like. So this is just kind of a rough spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be pretty or anything like that. It just has to have the CAS number, the chemical name, container size, which is basically the quantity within it. So if you have a 1 liter bottle of something with 1 liter of acetone or acetic acid in it, 1.5 liters for that, just put that as a numerical form there and then have the units on the other side, whether it's a liter, gram, milligram, whatever phase it's in. You can just put that and then I'll be able to upload that into the system. What I can't upload is if you don't have those numbers in there, I can't do that. Not necessarily like the CAS numbers, but if I don't have a quantity or the unit that it's in, then I can't upload it. I'll have to come back and say, hey, what are these numbers? But that's pretty basic of what I need. And it's easy to do it that way as well. I'm more than happy to enter it in. I gotta preface it with it takes me quite a bit of time, so it's not going to happen immediately by any means.
One more.
Yep.
So we typically have a chemical storage room that is separate from our labs. How do you deal with that situation? Do you have to have all the chemicals in the storage room on this? And if you move it from the storage room to your lab, how do you deal with updating the system?
So on a day-to-day basis, you don't really need to say that it's moved like that, but there is a way to transfer the chemical. You can basically what we do for that is you'll have your lab space in there, and then I'll also assign that storage to you. It doesn't mean that you own it or you're responsible for it or anything like that. I mean, you're responsible for what you have in there, but as a whole, you're not. So you would have your lab and you would have the storage area assigned to you, and you'd have basically two inventories to say like, I have, 10 liters of ethanol in the storage, and then I have what's in my lab. And so you'd be able to do that. And you can transfer stuff in between labs. I don't have two labs in here right now, so I don't think I can do it. But there is a way to do that. And it should be actually in these inventory instructions. It'll show you how to do that. Yes.
Is there a way that you can also upload into the system the location? Is that something that, because I thought you had a way to have location included on the chemical.
Do you mean in like the what?
Location of the lab?
Yeah. Yep. So that's,
we have that on our Excel spreadsheet.
yeah.
Can that get uploaded?
Yeah, actually, that's a good point too. So I can upload that. What I'll do is I'll assign myself to your lab, and then I'll go through and add those storage units basically through this section right here. If it was your lab, I would just select it, and then I would go through and I would type in what you listed in your spreadsheet. And then
You have to do that one by one?
yeah.
We have literally hundreds.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I wouldn't be entering it in one by one. What I mean is if you gave me a spreadsheet, what I would do is just I'm uploading it. And so the system will recognize what it needs based on the cast number and stuff like that. And so it automatically does it.
Automatically does what?
It automatically fills up your inventory. So it's reading what you've put into that spreadsheet.
You have to go by one and put the location.
No. So I can make it so that basically what I have to do is
sample location information.
Yeah, I have to enter your storage locations in, and it's smart enough to grab that storage location and then put everything aside.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because if it's going to be, I would like this to be useful for us too. So if a student comes in, wants a chemical, wants to know where it is, but they could go to this and it would tell them where we're located. This is on.
Yeah.
Solvent cabinet, is it in the freezer, because we have a lot of chemicals that are stored in the freezer.
Yeah.
So we need, otherwise it's maybe helpful to you, but it's worthless to us.
Yeah, I understand. So it's basically, you can do that. It's not like me moving everything around individually. It's smart enough to pick up on that. It just gets a little clunky because there's sometimes the cast number is a little off, or it doesn't match what the name of the chemical is, and it gets confused. And then I'm fixing that. So that's fine.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
I have a question on that, because you showed us that the list of these 200 types of ethanol and all kinds of foods and so on, but even on the list, I could see that some of them essentially were the same, which is slightly different name.
Yeah.
And then you have to also use this cast numbers, which should actually be a unique identifier. So why is that list so long? Couldn't that be condensed to maybe 5 categories of ethanol or so, depending on the proof or so?
Yeah. Let me see if I can do a quick. The reason it is like that is because to regulated waste, what they do is just, it's a little different for them in terms of what they enter in. So sometimes they'll get a chemical mixture that's 90 proof ethanol. They're still submitting it as hazardous waste manifest as whatever the cast number is for ethanol, and they'll send it off like that. Whether it has 10, milliliters of water in it doesn't really matter to them. So they'll kind of send it off in that way. So that's why you kind of see like a lot of them. But if you had a specific cast number, if I was to type in ammonium sulfate, I'm probably going to get that list of 200. But if I type in the cast number, sometimes you only get 2 if it's something specific like that. Like that's not a mixture, that's just pure ammonium sulfate. So then it kind of eliminates more of that list for you if you use the cast number in that way.
Yeah, because some of these, there are various ways to indicate the, ethanol concentration and ethanol water mixture. It can be proof, or it can be percent, or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing in the end. So you have all kinds of duplicates in your entry system.
Yeah, and so like I said, with the regulated waste team, when they send this stuff off, they're uploading this into their system because they might see, if I was to use a way out there example, let's say you had a mixture of a pesticide and ethanol, if they see it again,
Which I understand.
Yeah.
That should be really different. If you have, let's say, 75% alcohol and 25% water, there are
Yeah.
5 different ways you can name that.
yeah,
And that is still exactly the same thing. It's not related to the chemical waste.
yeah. And I mean, it's not going to goof them up on their end, whichever one you choose. Just make sure that, if you had something like that and there is actually like 75-25 listed on there, you can select that. And then they know that that's a mixture already in the system. And so it helps them out in the long run.
Is there any way, once everything is entered, can it be printed off so you can have a hard copy as well? So instead of always referring back to the system?
Yep. Now I have to remember. So there's a view, print your storage inventory. You can email it to yourself, and then you can also print it off, which I think if it just emailed it to myself. I don't know, it'll eventually show up in there. It's probably thinking about it. It's my blind house, blue shed. Oh, it's like storage unit, that's why. Huh. There used to be an easier way to do this. There we go. I'm kidding. So all my undefined stuff will show up, and then I'm able to print that off. I just don't know why it breaks it down by storage unit now. Never used to do that. But, or maybe if you click that, that's the whole thing. There we go. Okay, yeah, you can email it to yourself, and then you can either download it in Excel or and print it from there. But it'll email it to you. Yep.
Is there a situation where you'll have to add a chemical, or because under add a chemical container, there was like a button for add a chemical? So we typed in like acetone or something. And then there was like add a chemical under it. And I think I've done this before where then it shows up with like a Z.
Oh, I'm trying to think what that would come up with. Do you mean like, oh, I know what you're talking about. So you want to create a chemical, right?
Mm-hmm. Or should we avoid doing that so that we don't add to that giant list of chemicals that are available to everyone?
No, you won't add to, because if you were me doing that, then it would, like I have some super user thing where I could accidentally create a huge list. But if you do that and you submit a chemical, then we have somebody in regulated waste that reviews that and make sure that, yeah, that's a legit thing.
Gotcha.
And then they'll add it into there. I forget where that button is, but yeah. So they'll do that. There's a guy that sits there and reviews that whole huge list day in and day out.
Okay.
Yes.
So if you click on the cast number in the inventory list, does it do something useful, like send it to a material safety data sheet or something like that? Because it looks like it has a link.
That one doesn't, but it will. I forget.
I mean, on the cast number,
Oh. Okay, yeah, so it basically gives you
yeah,
I'll be-
something useful.
yeah.
Who knew?
So
Yes.
yeah, I was gonna show you that part, but I just get confused. But what it does do is so if you have all this stuff in your inventory, it'll give you like hundreds examples of STSs from whoever. It's really useful, especially if you're using pesticides or something like that. But definitely, if you have issues with, you know, if you have hundreds of chemicals in your lab and you don't want to have all the STSs, what everybody used to have was huge books and stuff like that. Yeah, this, you know, when it comes to that OSHA definition, do you have all the STSs available to your students? If all your students have access to this and they know that they can look at that CAS number and find the STS, you're covered by that and by my book. So yeah, that's another good point of that as well.
Okay, that helps, thanks.
Yes.
So you mentioned in terms of the list of chemicals, it's based on the ones that have been disposed of as hazardous chemicals. Does that mean for the purposes of this inventory, we focus on those chemicals, or we include all chemicals that we're using in the lab that aren't necessarily disposed of as chemical things?
So it kind of depends on how you want. If you want to use this to manage all your chemicals, you can do that. But what we're looking for is anything that has those GHS symbols, whether it's flammable, toxic, corrosive, anything that would have that pictogram, like the one that showed up on the SDS, if it has that in that, that has to be included in that. So if you have something that's like agar plates, that's non-hazardous, doesn't have to go in the system. Or DNA kits, that doesn't have to go in there. I can send you guys a whole list of stuff that we wouldn't consider necessary. And that probably saves you even more time. So
Yeah, it's actually good to say that I was going to ask about enzymes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, don't have to include that in there either. If it's considered not hazardous, don't worry about it.
Okay.
And will this at some point become a compulsory system for labs to use, or this can be a voluntary system?
This will be required by the end of 2022. Yeah.
That's important.
So if it's going to be possibly required then by the end of 2022 and labs are submitting their spreadsheets to you, when would you need them by to be in, or would they, or is the deadline to get the spreadsheets to you by the end of 2022 to be entered sometime in 2023 then?
So that would be on me once you send it to me. So then you, as far as I'm concerned, if I don't get it entered in by the end of 2022, then that's on me. So, yep.
So when we send this list to you, or when we create this, how do you verify that those chemicals are actually in the lab? Or how do you verify that the lab has actually entered all the hazardous chemicals on this list? And who is responsible?
So whoever is managing the lab, obviously that's who's responsible, but I'm not going to labs and checking to make sure that all 200, 400 chemicals are on that list. It's kind of like the honored system, make sure that it's reasonably accurate. Now, the only thing that we're asking labs to do is every year to take a look at it. And if it's changed, then, you know, you can add or subtract stuff, but that's once a year, you got to do that. Yep.
Yeah, but actually 2 years ago, we had the whole inspections, the chemical inspection building, and that one was actually this, as Stephen mentioned, that the potentially explosive chemical was detected. So is this serving also to that purpose that there's at least some idea what those teams are looking for in labs, or is it completely unrelated?
It's somewhat related. I'm not going into the system and looking at everybody's labs to see what they have in terms of hazardous materials. Usually, if it was something more specific, maybe for peroxide formers or something like that. Not usually, I'm not looking at that before I go on inspections. What I'm usually looking for when I go out on inspections is just general, are chemicals segregated? Are they stored properly? That type of thing. When I did find the PFC that was in Aggie's lab, that was just kind of like, hey, kind of just take a look at what you have, because she was thinking about cleaning out the lab. And so that was a different scenario. And I was kind of more in depth looking at what she had in order to make sure that regulated waste knew what they were getting into before they came and grabbed everything. So I was just kind of happened to see that. But that being said, when I'm on inspection now, I'm definitely looking for peroxide forming chemicals, because I do find them quite often, not necessarily to that extent, but I do find them quite a bit.
Yeah, because I think we had another incident there, which was a little, less over the regulatory storage time, expiry date. So I think that's really part of intrinsic of safety on campus, that we know that things can be discovered, so that it's really that inspection at a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess on a related note on that, so say somebody has a chemical like that in their lab. They have to put a date for when it's sort of to be used by for that chemical. And is that used by dates just for those specific classes of chemicals that are potentially hazardous at a degrade? Or is that for all chemicals?
I believe like some of them will have like expiration dates, not necessarily all of them. If you were to get like a general bottle of acetone, I don't think that would have an expiration date on it. But if you had certain other types of chemicals that could polymerize or something like that, they might have an expiration date on them. These ones do, because over time, once you open it, or even if you don't open it, it'll take that oxygen, do whatever it does with it, and then it'll start getting kind of snowy inside the bottle, and then you have a problem. But they usually put expiration dates on the containers so that it's not good for experiments anymore, and it's not good for people handling this, and that you should get rid of it. And so it gives it a buffer time. There's at least a safety factor built into that expiration date for you guys to get rid of it.
And the system alerts the PI somehow of the chemicals they need to dispose of.
I believe it does, but I'm not entirely sure. We, from our end, we can see we can filter out by all the PFCs and then see which ones are expired. And then we can send an email to that PI and say, hey, you should get rid of this. So. Yep.
So I'm pretty clear on chemicals that are hazardous from the point of view of flammable from peroxides. But when we have small amounts of chemicals that are, for example, carcinogenic, I had the feeling that wasn't in the same category as these, or are those things that we should be entering as well?
Yeah, that's another thing too. So when you look at the GHS symbols, if you have something that's carcinogenic, it'll have the picture of the guy with the lungs on it. And so that's another pictogram that's included on that list. So I'll send you guys everything that has to be inside the system, and that is one that's included in that. Yep. Yes.
So I guess if we're going through all of our chemicals and say we find something that was left unlabeled for a questionable amount of time, I know sometimes it's not the easiest to get rid of it because they need to know what it is to pick it up.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations on how to potentially deal with that?
Yeah. Actually, let me hide this. So if you go on our webpage, you go under the Department of Environmental Health and Safety, you go to regulated waste. Now I have to remember where they put this, as waste disposal. And then they have a section that says unknown chemical waste disposal procedure. And basically all this is a Qualtrics form where you're going to type in, if you have like a liter bottle of no label, something on it, you'll just have a request form and you'll fill everything out. How much is in it, who you are, comments. If you have a kind of an idea of what you think it could be, you can type that in there and then it'll help them whittle it down. Because what they're going to do is just do the unknowns test where they're dipping in litmus paper and stuff like that and trying to figure out what the pH is and what colors it makes when it's flammable or when they burn it and stuff like that. So that's kind of what they're going to do. If you have a reasonable idea of what that is, then that's really helpful to them. So what you do if you have a chemical like that, you just go through this list, enter it in, and they'll contact you.
Okay.
So maybe Evan, you can comment about the inspection process and what we should be doing to prepare for the inspections next year.
Yes. So it's pretty simple. Basically, all we're looking for, and so it's me, and then I'll also have somebody named Nancy Ralstead. If you have biological materials, whether you're BSL 1 or 2, she'll be along with me. So basically what we're looking for, she's looking for anything biologically related. Me, I'm more chemical safety. just general safety type items. You know, is the electrical panel blocked? Is your eye wash checked? I'm looking for documents. Pretty important is having your lab specific training done annually. So everybody in your lab has been trained on the specific hazards within your lab. We also have a document if you want to keep track of that on our website that's in the document library to catalog that. So training is a big component of that. I'm just basically looking for how chemicals are stored, what kind of chemicals you have, just in case you do have a PFC that somebody forgot about, tucked away in the back. God, I forget where this one is now.
That's just a training.
Okay, there's that one, but there's also the log. There it is, lab specific training log. And this probably won't show up now. But this is just basically a log where people can, it's suggested you can just use this, go through all this stuff, hazard communication, where your safety equipment is, housekeeping, decontamination methods, emergency procedures, and you're checking everything off, that you're going over that with your employees. You have, if you have additional topics, if you're using specific chemicals, specific hazardous equipment, you can add that in there. Let's say you have like an autoclave or something, if that wasn't listed above here. You could list, hey, we did autoclave training for these individuals, and then they print their names, sign it, and say what date they received that training. So you keep that. And so when I go to labs, I'm looking for that to make sure that that was done and that your employees that are working in this area are actually trained to handle these types of stuff. Eye wash station has to be flushed weekly, it has to have a log by it. Chemical segregation, was your fume hood checked by FM, these types of things. So it's pretty basic, but if I have specific questions, we'll just go through and ask, would you guys use this chemical for something like that? But it's pretty quick. It's not really daunting. My background isn't in lab environments. I used to work in a shipyard for about 8 years. So it's not like I'm pointing out experiments and I know what they are. So, but we try to look at all the chemicals and stuff like that to make sure that they're properly stored and people are using them correctly. So
do you anticipate inspecting all the labs? Yeah.
I believe so. I don't think that I had the opportunity when Aggie was here to inspect all your guys' labs. So it would probably be all of them. Yep.
So regarding the lab specific safety training, if we have that all electronically, do we still need all this paperwork log, or is the electronic documentation?
No, this is just a recommend, if people didn't have a template and they wanted to use this, they could use that. But if you already have something else and already documents everything and it's electronic, that's totally fine.
Do we have any other questions on general topics related to safety that people are concerned about? I've noticed in the labs.
Cool. All right. Cool.
Well, thanks, Evan, for today and taking us through how to use the Chematix system.
Yeah.